So now we'll talk about mineral properties and identification. As of today, over 4,000 different minerals have been identified, and they are identified based on their characteristics of their physical properties, which include color, streak, luster, hardness, specific gravity or density, crystal habit or form, cleavage, fracture, and other special properties. And we'll discuss each of these over the next few slides. Some properties, like hardness or specific gravity, are common to all minerals, whereas others, like cleavage, are only occurring in certain minerals. So here in the picture, we've got several minerals in their aggregated forms as well as sort of crushed or eventually powdered. First, we discuss color. Color is the result of the mineral's reaction with light, and only some colors are reflected and seen by the human eye. Importantly, color is not a diagnostic property of minerals, as many minerals have similar colors, and some minerals have more than one color. So we saw this in our initial title slide with quartz. We're seeing it again here. All of the three minerals pictured on the left part of your screen are quartz. We have milky quartz, clear quartz, and rose quartz, all a result of slight impurities in the mineral composition. So by impurities, I mean trace or very small amounts of different minerals like aluminum or iron that may color the quartz in a different way than its typical or totally pure form. Next, we have streak. Streak is the color of the powdered form of the mineral. So this results from rubbing the mineral against a streak plate of unglazed porcelain in introductory geoscience labs. So this example of hematite, which is also a technical term for rust, has a reddish brown streak, as you might imagine. Next, we have luster, which is the way a mineral's surface reflects light. There are two main types of luster. These are metallic or non-metallic. And non-metallic can be broken up into descriptors like silky, glassy, satiny, resinous, pearly, or earthy. Now, these descriptive characteristics are subjective, somewhat subjective, meaning someone's idea of pearly may be different than some other person's idea of pearly. But metallic and non-metallic are pretty standard across geoscientists, and a good example is that a pyrite on the left-hand side of the screen has a metallic luster, whereas the feldspars, whether it's plagioclase or potassium feldspar, have a non-metallic luster. Personally, I would describe these feldspars as having an earthy or resinous texture, but you can see somebody else might describe them differently. Hardness is a measure of the ability of the mineral to resist scratching, and it's measured on a scale called the Mohs hardness scale. This is a logarithmic scale, as you can see from the shape of the graph, and it goes from 1 to 10, with 1 being the softest mineral and 10 being the hardest mineral. In terms of units of actual hardness, this is a quantitative measurement, kilograms per millimeter squared. Each mineral is scratched by those minerals with higher numbers. So we see that diamond is the hardest mineral. That's why people say diamonds are forever. That's why people think they're somewhat indestructible, because they are harder than any other mineral on Earth. Talc is very soft. In between, we've got some common minerals like calcite, quartz, and topaz. Also on this scale, importantly, it's important to know that a fingernail has a 2.5 hardness, a copper penny has a 3.5 hardness, glass or steel knife has a 5.5 hardness, and a steel file has a 6.5 hardness. So we test the hardness of different minerals by trying to scratch a glass plate, and typically we just say, oh, if it's scratched a glass plate, then it's very hard, whereas if it was scratched by the plate itself or couldn't scratch the plate, then it is soft. Specific gravity is a term that describes the density of a mineral, and it's a specific way to describe density through the ratio of the weight of a volume of the mineral and the weight of an equal volume of water. So water is known to have a specific gravity of 1.0 or unity, and quartz has a specific gravity of 2.6. So in this case, quartz would sink in water. And on the picture to your left, you've got two different rocks, which should be minerals, but let's assume or pretend that they're minerals with different specific gravities. One of them is floating in the water, and one of them has sunk. This is an important property. Crystal habit or form refers to the shape of a single euhedral crystal, or the character of an aggregate of many well-formed crystals that grew together as a group. So this is basically the shape of the crystal. This is something that you don't get too detailed in as a introductory to geoscience student. Garnet has a very specific crystal habit, but many other minerals do not, or they have crystal habits with difficult names to learn. So we don't discuss it much. But this picture does show that in this cave of calcite, these calcite crystals have grown to be larger than humans, which is pretty neat. And each of them has a specific crystal habit that's sort of long and needle-like. Cleavage is a very important diagnostic property for mineral identification, and it is the idea that some minerals break to form distinctive planar surfaces along weak internal bonding planes. So the areas where we have weak bonds are the areas where the planes form, and this mineral is called a mica, and all mica minerals have this very nice planar cleavage that make them look like distinct pages of a book. So we often call micas book micas. And this is cleavage. Not all minerals have cleavage, but the ones that do, it really helps identify the mineral if you are able to identify the cleavage. Fracture is when a mineral breaks along and no regular planar surface due to internal bonds of equal strength in multiple directions. So the idea is minerals with cleavage break along their cleavage planes, but minerals with irregular fracture break in irregular patterns. One specific type of irregular fracture is called conchoidal fracture, and this is where it produces a curved surface with these sort of lines or circles surrounding the break, the focal point of the break. Importantly, quartz and glass have this conchoidal fracture because of the silica bonds that are present. Some minerals have special properties, with the two most important for typical mineral identification in an introduction to geoscience class are reaction with hydrochloric acid. So the main mineral that does this is calcite. So if you drop a little drop of hydrochloric acid on the calcite, it bubbles and effervesces. Another important property is magnetism. So minerals like magnetite and hematite are magnetic and they attract metal objects. Taste is another important special property. So halite or table salt has the taste of salt. I don't recommend in any mineral kit that you get to taste the minerals because some of them are toxic. So don't try that. Also, striations occur in some minerals, for example, in plagioclase feldspar. Striations are just scratches along the edges or along the surface of the mineral. Researchers classify minerals by their chemical composition, and this is based on the anion or negative ion or anionic molecule. And the major groups through chemical classifications are silicates, sulfides, oxides, halides, carbonates, native metals, and sulfates. And in the pictures to the right, we have examples of each of these types, starting with olivine as a silicate, pyrite or fool's gold as a sulfide, hematite as an oxide, halite as a halide, calcite as a carbonate, gold as a native metal, and gypsum as a sulfate. The final slide of part 2 discusses the silicates. We could go into detail about the chemical composition for each mineral group, but the most important by far are the silicates because they are the most abundant group of minerals on Earth and compose more than 90% of rocks. Importantly, silicates all have these silicon-oxygen tetrahedra, where one silica atom is surrounded by 4 oxygen atoms. And the way that we have different minerals forming from this silicate oxygen tetrahedra is that the tetrahedra are arranged in various ways to form different subgroups within the silicates. And the ratio of oxygen to silica is also determined by how the tetrahedra link together. So while there is 1 oxygen for every 4 silica atoms in the diagrams to the left, as soon as we add more oxygens in different places, those silica start to get shared between different oxygens and allow for different mineral makeups. So the different groups of silicates are the isolated tetrahedra, which are olivine and garnet, single chains like pyroxenes, double chains like amphiboles, sheets like the micas. So imagine the books of mica or the cleavage planes of mica forming in sheets. That's because these silicon tetrahedra organize themselves in sheets. And 3-dimensional frameworks like quartz or feldspars.